Hello, emerging and evolving leaders. I'm Christine Rozier, host of the Irrelevant Leader podcast and founder of the Leadership Collaborative and Rozier Retreats. My platforms are dedicated to expanding the pool of exceptional leaders. I'm honored to be your leadership expert today. I believe that every person has the potential to become an extraordinary leader, and in doing so, significantly impact the lives of others. Extraordinary leadership begins with mindset. Relevant leaders are committed to developing the qualities necessary to successfully lead others, qualities that are cultivated and refined over time. Throughout the Irrelevant Leader podcast series, some of the world's most relevant leaders and I examine the behaviors and characteristics of irrelevant leaders. Tune in as we dig deep into identifying what goes wrong when a leader moves down the path from powerful leadership to ineffectual leadership. Join me for live call-in sessions, one-on-one interviews, and thought leadership segments as high-profile leaders and I explore what it takes for you to avoid the blight of dreaded irrelevancy and outline how you can achieve and maintain your place among the world's most profound and relevant leaders. Thank you again for listening. Let's get to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. I am thrilled and honored to have as my special guest today, Tim Gurman. I've known Tim for many years, and he is truly a relevant leader. Tim Gurman is Chief Commercial Officer at Carterra. He spent 31 years commercializing technology in life sciences and healthcare. He has managed sales and marketing teams, and for the last 20 years has been a VP and C-level executive, helping to build or rebuild revenue streams and drive the valuation of both public and private companies. Tim is the alumnus of some exceptional technology businesses that successfully exited to strategic partners, including Affymetrix, now part of Thermo Fisher, Stratagene, now part of Agilent, and Hillrom, now part of Baxter. He was also the Chief Operating Officer at RF Technologies, where he was the architect of a turnaround, taking a business that had been in decline over a decade and growing at 25% in the first year. Eventually, Tim started his own consultancy where he focused on early-stage commercialization. One of his clients, Carterra, convinced him to join full-time, where he has spent the last 5 years. Carterra has developed and commercialized a drug discovery technology that has improved the speed by which pharmaceutical companies discover antibodies as drugs. In just a few short years, Carterra's technology has become the standard in 17 of the largest 20 pharmaceutical companies in the world, as well as the National Institute of Health and the FDA. Eli Lilly used Carterra's platform to discover the first COVID-19 therapeutic in just 90 days, a new world's record. Tim's expertise includes team building, sales operation, commercial strategy, and forecasting. He has been a guest lecturer at Princeton University and recently authored a book chapter about leveraging technology as a response to COVID-19. In 2020, Tim was also co-author on a publication in Science, one of the most prestigious technical journals. Tim graduated from Brigham Young University's Marriott School of Business and has been married 33 years. He and his wife, Joy, live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and have 5 children and 7 grandchildren. Welcome, Tim. So happy to have you on the show today, so let's get started.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So as a leader, what does relevance mean to you?
Since your invite a little while ago, I've had a chance to do some reflection on that. And I really put myself in the position of actually being led versus trying to think about what I'm doing currently as a leader. And I just think about the great leaders that I had and the bad ones that I've been victim of. And it's really a question of adding value. The leaders that I have come to respect and actually internalize some of their own practices and what I do in my organization today comes from the value that they added to what I was doing. And that came in many forms, right? It comes in an example, many led by example. Others have led when they joined arm in arm with me to accomplish something. Others led by actually not saying much at all, but letting me see the result of either something that I did well or a mistake, and letting that sort of marinate. And so all of those approaches create an environment in which someone, irrespective of the level within the organization, there can thrive. And so I've really thought about this, not so much as the leading I'm doing today, but how I was led. And I can tell you, it was the leaders that added value to me and what I was doing that really made a difference.
Thank you. I love the word value. I think about it all the time in terms of, am I adding value in everything that I do? And that is truly why I started the podcast, so that I could offer value to people who are interested in being relevant leaders. I really appreciate your bringing that up and your perspective around that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You in one of your writings, you've said, look, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of tapes, certainly a lot of podcasts now on leadership, but really a dialogue between leaders that actually allows them to cross-pollinate the leadership sort of band within all of our organizations really can help us do well, because we don't turn to our subordinates or people within our organizations for advice, not because they don't have good advice. It's just, I think we feel like that puts us in some sort of a weakened state or weakened position. And so the ability for leaders to leverage each other is really a wonderful approach. I was very intrigued as I learned more about kind of how you've brought that approach to consulting and coaching.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I have found that where is it that leaders go or can go or have the opportunity to go and have these discussions? And I didn't find many places, which is why I think creating that place and creating that space is so important. So what are some of the ways and practices that you engage in remaining relevant, or in those who have led you? What do you believe they did to remain relevant?
I think there's two words, and they're probably part of, guidance that people have gotten, but in other contexts, right? Stop, look, and listen. So look and listen are really important for leaders. We are so busy, right? We tell ourselves we're busy. Other people tell us we're busy. And so in our minds, we're so busy that we don't look and listen to those whom we are leading for feedback as to how relevant we are to them. In other words, how much value we're adding. So the things that come to mind is that we're leaders in different contexts, right? Sometimes it's a company email we have to send out. Sometimes it's actually an all hands meeting where you're standing up in front. Sometimes it's a one-on-one in the field in front of a customer. But at every one of those opportunities, leaders should be looking around at the reaction of the people that they're leading. What is their body language? Are they convulsing as you speak? Is their back straightening? Are their eyebrows going up? Are you saying something interesting? Are you adding value in all of those contexts? And because we are so busy and because we are so important as leaders, we don't look and listen very much. And so to remain relevant, you have to get feedback that what you're saying, how you're saying it, where you're saying it, is adding value to the people that you lead.
So important. So important. One of the things that I coach around and work on with clients and within myself is this active listening. It's exactly what you said. What's coming back to me as a result of what I have just communicated, and taking the time to understand that and help identify whether or not the message that I was intending to communicate actually was communicated.
Yeah, and so much of this is, and the COVID-19 exercise for the world was extremely destructive to personal relationships. And we began leading by Zoom and WebEx more than we had done previously, almost exclusively without personal interaction. And, if your camera's off or you can't see much of someone, a lot of these personal cues have gone away. And so we're now having to get back in the practice, both with customers and with those whom we lead, at reading these cues. And that looking and listening will help you recognize whether what you're doing is in fact relevant to those whom you're leading.
So in terms of characteristics, if I said, what are the 3 characteristics that you believe are very important in remaining relevant? I heard you say active listening or listening in general. What other characteristics would you identify as being part of remaining relevant as a leader?
There's a few things. One of my mantras that I've used over the years, and I realized it very early in my career, is that there's nothing that substitutes for the horses. Meaning, the people that do the work are irreplaceable. Leaders can be replaced, processes can be fine-tuned, products can be changed, new products come. But in the end, most businesses succeed and can attribute their success to really good people doing good things. And so as a leader, if you realize it's not about you, and while you still must do things to enable and to resource and to attract good people to the organization, in the end, there's nothing that substitutes for the horses. And when you have that orientation, you tend to be a better leader, knowing that they're incredibly valuable and invaluable. Now, it doesn't mean we don't make changes. It doesn't mean that there are people who struggle or have life circumstances that are going to lead them out of the organization. But on the whole, if you look at it across businesses, irrespective of whether they're, trades or technology businesses, it's good people doing good things. So that's one for sure. The second one, I think, is awareness, and that goes to the look and listen part. You really have to be aware of whether or not you're adding value. There's one exercise that, just a quick anecdote here. When I was leading RF Technologies, I had a vice president who was very talented, very well educated and skilled, very polished personally. But there was an enormous disconnect between what the person's organization thought of them and the value they thought they were getting or not getting, and what was in his mind as to what he was providing them. And so I had the thought in a one-on-one with him one day to go through an exercise whereby I suggested that he get with his team and have them write down on a piece of paper, could be confidential or whatnot, if they were to hang a sign over his door that would describe what they think either happens in there or some descriptor of him or the value he's adding, what would that sign say? Now, I had already had a lot of meetings with people in his organization, and I knew the answer to that already. And so I asked him, if your organization, if your team were to get together on a sign they would hang outside your door, what would it say? And he said, it would say, great collaborator. I provide a lot of value, a lot of leadership. I said, well, I can tell you that's not what it's going to say. Mm. And then I've used this actually with others and in other organizations. And very quickly, people realize even when they go to ask their people to do this exercise, they begin to do this introspection. And that's when the reality hits. We might think, we kind of cringe if we think too much about what they might say, but it's really important to get that feedback. This is part of awareness, part of looking and listening, but there's a more specific exercise where people get to write down on a, maybe it's not an actual sign. Unfortunately, I hope it would not be an actual sign, but what would they hang on your door? And the other thing the leader should do is, what do you want it to say? What do you want it to say? And the leadership that you're providing, is that generating that sort of response out of those same people? I mean, I want the one that would hang on my door to say something like, a lot of stuff gets done here, or stuff gets done here. And that's not a comment on whether they like everything about me or like everything I've said or every policy we've enacted, but I want them to know that stuff gets done, and they can take comfort that the process and the business is going to move forward. And so it's a really interesting exercise when you ask people to think about hanging that sign or having somebody else draft the sign for you.
Yes. What a powerful, powerful exercise. And I'm thinking, as a leader, it certainly identifies the type of courage that you have to engage in that exercise. And
oh, yeah.
I'm with you. I think awareness is really the foundation of everything. And to have an exercise that provides that kind of awareness.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we shy away from these exercises because we really know where we're deficient. I mean, people know themselves.
Sure.
There are other people who are completely unaware. They say and do things that they don't realize are not productive and don't add value. But something pointed like that, even when you just go to plan it, you begin cringing at some of the things that you know are going to end up on that sign. But anyway, and the last thing I think I would say is what I call the long pole syndrome. So if you go to a circus and you take the long pole out of the main circus tent, the whole thing falls, right? It all comes down. And I think as leaders, sometimes we think leadership is being a long pole in the tent, such that if we leave, everything's going to collapse. And that's actually the antithesis, in my view, of good leadership. Good leadership is not that you are the long pole, but that you've constructed the organization to have its own long pole. And if you walk outside to get lunch and you get hit by a beer truck tomorrow, the company is going to not only be around, it's going to continue on some track that's up and to the right, whether that's sales or productivity or customer satisfaction or whatever those things, because you've remembered and you've acted in a way that you know nothing substitutes for the horses. You went out, you found good people, you enabled them, you got out of their way. You were also aware of deficiencies. You tried to fill those gaps. And if sadly you had to leave tomorrow, the thing is going to keep going. So I think that's those three things I think are really important about somebody who's relevant to their organization.
Very nice. Thank you. Yes. And I think about the struggle that can be for new leaders early in their career, where they don't yet necessarily understand that they're not the long pole. I think it takes some time and maturity for many leaders to come to that conclusion and then begin developing all those areas that you mentioned to be that long pole. Because some of the leaders I work with think they're supposed to be it. They're just supposed to be all-knowing all the time, everywhere. It's just not reasonable, and it's not good leadership.
I completely agree. I think the way that I describe it to not just early managers I've been around, but those that I've promoted early in their careers to management, is that when you're young in your career, early in your career as it relates to management, you think that managers manage. So you immediately start doing things overtly to people around you that are generally potentially unnecessary. Remember, if you've gone out and your job is really to find the good people and then and resource them and get out of the way. So if you as a manager believe you must manage them, and maybe there is a deficiency, maybe you have rightly identified something that's not happening that should or it's wrong. In the end, it's about getting them to do something different of themselves, not doing it yourself. And so there's all kinds of words for micromanagement and things like that. But that it's really just overly exercising your job as a leader on people around you. And it's just unnecessary in most cases. But it's only when you develop a confidence and this awareness that we talked about that you step back and you let the good people do their thing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So what have been some of your own personal struggles as you have grown into the leader that you are?
There's two, I think, very instructive things that I've thought about in this regard. One is that I fell in love very early in my youth with the movie Patton. And my dad was in the military, and I think the movie came out actually when we lived overseas. And I just had this affinity, him being able to accomplish so much. And it's one of the reasons why I love nonfiction today. It actually happened. These things happened, and they happened because of him in a lot of what's cataloged in the film. The problem is, though, there were a lot of things that were undesirable about what he did, and he got in trouble. And so whether it was the military or the president, they had to thump him on the nose several times. And so there's this dichotomy of being the kind of leader. And there's this very famous scene in the movie where this mid-level colonel can't get his troops across a river. And as he's dithering around, worrying about it, looking at maps, he hears this voice from the other side, and it's Patton. And he's saying, what are you guys waiting on? And he had gone over there himself and said, get over here. So there's an element in leadership that is really, truly inspiring about something like that. But then when you actually degrade or dehumanize people as part of the process, which he was caught doing at times, you can't have that. So I've struggled with making sure that the elements of motivation and inspiration and true drive, because Patton's Third Army executed on one of the most rigorous and successful liberations during the Battle of the Bulge of the Bastogne, and they marched hundreds of miles without food in the middle of winter, and no one's ever done that in the history of warfare. And yet he was felled as a professional by some of these other personal conduct issues in the way he treated people and talked about people. So I've wanted to employ a lot of the good and not ever broach the bad of that. So that's been one of my struggles, is to make sure that I call the right things. So one of my kids is named Patton, and that's part of the process of keeping this forefront in my mind. And then the second one was, as technology has evolved, we as leaders have to actually adapt and use technology in a way that benefits our organizations and drives them to a different place versus discouraging them. I'll give you an example. Very early, I think we were into the world of email, probably a dozen years. And I was a new manager. I was working for a small biotech company, but we had a global operation. And I was defensive of our sales folks. So the production team had some problems, and we just couldn't get product out to customers for a time. And it was very distressing. The reps weren't able to make commission. And so just as a young sales manager, it was something that I felt like I had to wade into. Instead of picking up the phone, finding the guy that had a production, speaking to him personally, I used this wonderful new tool called email to send this flaming missive. And I used words like incredulous and all these things that just are the hallmarks of, never getting kind of the response you need. And one of the things I've learned, frankly, and as part of this, and that I teach young managers, is that email is good for information dissemination. It is not good for problem resolution. So if after one email, everything is not locked down in whatever you're trying to get done, pick up the phone. And sometimes it's hard for people who aren't used to resolving things in person. They've grown up with email. They think it's the way to. Things don't get resolved on email. Nobody ever says after a flame email, "You're right, I'm sorry." Nothing. You'll never see that. And so I had a very inspired boss. Talk about a relevant leader. He sent me a reply email, but with just 4 words. Just 4 words. It's never left me. It said, "This is not helpful." And I immediately just shrunk in my chair, and I realized I knew I shouldn't have done that.
Sure.
But that's when I was showing that at that moment, it was about me.
Yes.
It was about me. I could use big words and I could make people feel bad about something. Probably they did fail, but it just wasn't the way to go about it. I've never done that again. And I've also tried to be the kind of relevant leader who can teach maybe something in 4 words. You don't need to, a long diatribe on this, that, and the other thing. This is not helpful. And it's always stuck with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being so honest about that experience. And I'm sure it has tremendous impact. It certainly does on me. I love the 4-word leadership. That's extremely powerful. So thank you for sharing that. What are your thoughts about the Great Resignation as it continues into 2022? And actually I read an article the other day that said it's turning into the Great Executive Resignation. What do you think is causing and continuing that trend right now?
I think those are 2 different things.
Okay.
And let's start with just the masses.
Okay.
I've grown up, I'm a Xer. My siblings are boomers, so I always hang that label on them, that I'm an Xer. And I just think that so much has of really significant import has been resolved in a relatively positive way throughout our history over the last few decades. If you think about the Cold War, how that got resolved, we looked really good in that. We hung out. It all worked out for us. Think about the 9/11 was horrific, and yet we came back from that. The economy rebounded. There's a gorgeous new building where the Twin Towers used to stand. We don't all like TSA. we don't like the airports, but we've been pretty safe. And then you had 2008, 2009, massive recession, the Great Recession. And, by 2010, 2011, things started to rebound, and it's just been a booming economy and a bull market. And even a global pandemic, which most of us obviously had not experienced. Nobody that's lived less than 100 years had experienced. And yet we're coming out of it, even though it was quite painful. And so I think what happened is that people have been convinced that irrespective of how large the problem is, the state will fix it. And it's not so much an entire reliance. It's just that the state will do something to make sure that we literally don't implode. And, there's rioting in the streets and, as they say in Ghostbusters, dogs mating with cats, all that just dire end of the world stuff. It's never happened, irrespective of how bad a situation has come up. And so I think what happened is people said, look, the state is going to fix it. It's going to be fine. But you know what? I'm feeling like, given all that's happened, I should be prioritizing my life more. And so they head off to jobs where they can work exclusively from home. That was never a reality, to where the majority of our workforce could be exclusively from home. And in fact, I think a lot of businesses are finding it isn't as productive. It doesn't mean people can't work from home at times and be productive, but to do that exclusively across our economy, it did not work. And I think the other thing is if you look at the surveys of those that participated in the Great Resignation, they also believe the vast majority of them did not make the best decision. So there was a comfort and an ease around, hey, I don't think this is ever going to implode, but I should be focusing on myself. And a lot of that is what happened. In terms of executives, I think they had a similar view of this. They realized that they've worked so hard over such a long period of time that it's time to take some of that equity, whether it be life equity or actual equity, off the table, and start focusing on some things that maybe are more important. So I can't comment obviously on everybody's individual decision, but we know that there was a Great Resignation. We also know the surveys are saying most of those folks were not pleased with the outcome of that. And so I think the pendulum is going to swing back, maybe not as far as it was, but to a situation that was more like it was than, say, the posture we had during COVID.
Thank you. And I'm glad you separated those two, because I hadn't really haven't taken the time to think that through to that degree. And it does make sense, because I have experienced people who have made a change and now are, sorry that they actually made that change.
Yeah, let me talk about one of the most insidious things that I find in business. And as a leader, it's very important because it comes out of our mouths all the time. And it should be couched with a little different approach, in my view. Okay. And that's the phrase work-life balance. When people interview, I talk about the culture in our company. I tell people we don't believe in work-life balance. And they're horrified, obviously. What? And I say, because when you talk about work-life balance, what you're saying is, if there is truly a balance, that's your home life and your work weigh the same. That's true balance. Yes. And that is never true. We don't believe that. I don't preach that. I don't believe it in my own life. Family and self are always first. Okay. That's how we rate. So family first. Somebody says, hey, I got a kid's graduation. I got a kid's birthday party. I got whatever it is. We say family first. We still have to get our work done. We run a business. So that reality never goes away. But this idea that work and your life are the same weighting, to me, is insidious and wrong. And we ought to always believe that it is self and family first. And very closely behind that, we obviously have to provide for ourselves. And then we're out working. So if a company is promoting work-life balance, meaning you ought to spend as much time with us as you do with home, or you ought to spend more time with us than you do at home, I would be very careful. I would dig into that. Every time somebody says work-life balance, I'd ask them specifically how that's manifest in their organization.
What a fantastic perspective, and a tool, which really leads into my next question, a tool that our listeners can take and use immediately as they might be transitioning into a different career or into other roles and jobs that shift in the way we look at work-life balance, I think, will be very important in assessing if it's the right place.
A couple of things. One on the self side, maybe one on the what we're doing with other people as relevant leaders. So on the self side, it's what we talked about before. It's the sign on the door exercise. I would do that. I would do that with yourself, and I would write it down, and then I would have a separate exercise with your team of managers or your team of subordinates, wherever they are, and I would have them do it and either submit it anonymously or whatever, and then compare what they put on the sign they would hang over your door and what you put on the sign that you hang over there. This is something that can be had very quickly, done very quickly. And I think not only if you're vulnerable enough to do that exercise for yourself, they'll do the very same exercise for themselves in their minds. They won't actually have to do it. They'll start thinking the same way. Hey, what do people think of me? What do people think of my output? If everybody in the company looked like me, how far would the company go? Those kinds of things. So I'd say that's one exercise you can do right now.
Yes.
Figure out what that personal sign over your door says. And then the second one is really a tactic that I would call it a tactic. It's not really a strategy, but it is there. It's multi-faceted in terms of its purpose. And it's engaging someone who you believe has leadership potential and has expressed maybe a desire to move on or take on different responsibility. And so what I've done over the years with folks like that, as things come into I forward them to an individual like this, and I call it leadership training, confidential. And I take out anything that, is too obviously, confidential within the organization, but I send them the issue or the problem unvarnished as it came to me. And I send it to them and I say, take a day or two. I didn't have a day or two to resolve this, but you take a day or two, you think about it, think about where it came from, think about what those people are expecting when they hear back from you. Think about the urgency with which you would do it. And so I want to hear from you where you would go, what you would say, how you would handle this. And we do this over and over and over. So whether it's a personnel issue, it's a business issue, even a customer issue, when you send those things unvarnished, the eyes open wide. I think they think at times when they're so absorbed in their own, they're not really sure what you do. They don't know sometimes how you're spending your day. But when you begin feeding them opportunities to expand their own view of the kinds of things that get dealt with and the way in which we deal with them, they're enlightened. They're actually better workers, but then they are indeed preparing to take on leadership roles. So this idea of picking someone in the organization, maybe one or two people, I don't do it with a lot at the same time, but then forwarding them unvarnished, maybe eliminating some confidential things, but unvarnished, the issues that come to you and having them see how close they can get to resolving them it's fascinating. It's a great exercise.
It sounds like a great exercise. And I think about the truth around developing leadership qualities and characteristics happens over time. It's not an event. It's not a go to class and now I'm a leader. And I think it's tremendous mentoring and ongoing training, if you will, to develop the types of leaders who will be relevant to the organization and to their people. Really appreciate that.
Secretly, it's also a way to get some empathy from our teams, right? Because I think, we make it look easy. We handle these things and we don't expose them to someone's. And by the way, one of the ways that I've described leadership is kind of a pivot, right? You manage up and you do all that you need to do to keep your leaders informed. And when things come your way, responsibilities, tasks, strategy, you become an umbrella for the people whom you lead. And you can't just send that stuff unfiltered all the way through. And so this pivot that leaders become, if you get good at it, you can make things look really easy and people don't know the things that you deal with every day and that you struggle. And so I think it's really enlightening. I've had nothing but positive out of this because we do contain it. It's not something we broadcast. It's people that are focused on becoming new and different and better. And yet they are continually surprised at some of the things that come to other leaders in the organization and how they might handle. I found that people are pretty good. Their sense is pretty good about how to treat stuff. Some of them are not as comfortable, say, picking up the phone and handling things directly, which is where I spend a lot of time. That willingness to do that in the comfort level of solution, person to person. But otherwise, just a good sense for how to move the business along in a good way and resolving some of these issues. I think people have really good sense. That's been my experience.
Wonderful. I want to thank you for your time today and your wisdom. I know that the audience will be very impacted and moved by the ideas and concepts and perspectives that you have shared with us today. And I know that taking a few of these takeaways, like listening and creating value and ongoing development of leaders, will enhance everyone. So I truly appreciate your time and your being with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was a treat. Thank you for having me, and gave me a chance to do more of that great introspection that we should all be doing as leaders. So this is a benefit to me, and greetings to all of your listeners out there. We look forward to seeing them out on the battlefield.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, Christine Rozier, and the Irrelevant Leader podcast series. Remember this: you are more extraordinary and capable than you think. To become the leader you aspire to be, you need the right tools and support to assist you in developing and maintaining the characteristics found in great and relevant leaders. That's why I host the Irrelevant Leader podcast, direct the year-long leadership collaborative, and Rozier Leadership Retreats. Visit the website at christinerozier.com, that's spelled ROSIER, to learn more. Check out the podcast page for upcoming live events and interviews with amazing, relevant leaders. If you're not already on the mailing list, then please sign up to join me and this powerful network of exceptional leaders.